When people think of rock and roll, there's really only one name that comes to mind first: Elvis Presley. Not one of the greats, the greatest, and yet somehow it took Hollywood 45 years after he left us to give him a movie that actually felt worthy of that name. That's the strange thing about Elvis. Documentaries about him, plenty, and some of them genuinely good. But a real big budget, this is how you honor the king kind of film, that never quite happened. Even John Carpenter took a swing at it decades ago, and it still wasn't it. So when Baz Luhrmann's Elvis finally landed in 2022, it arrived carrying the weight of nearly half a century of fan expectation. No pressure, right? Here's the thing about making an Elvis movie. It's deceptively hard. You can cast a lookalike for almost any musician in history and get away with it. But Elvis on stage wasn't just a performance, it was a presence, this electric, dangerous, magnetic thing that doesn't translate easily to another human body. You can imitate the hips, the sneer, the voice. Recreating that stage presence is another story entirely. So the bar fans were really setting wasn't perfection. It was a convincing impression, something better than the parade of cringeworthy Elvis impersonations we've all sat through over the years. And that's exactly what this film delivers. Nobody walked into this expecting a flawless resurrection. They just wanted it done right, finally, and Austin Butler clears that bar by a wide margin. He's got rough edges here and there, sure, but nothing that pulls you out of the experience. What really sets this film apart from every half-hearted Elvis project before it isn't just the production value, although there's plenty of that. It's the fact that the two people steering this ship, Tom Hanks and Baz Luhrmann, are genuine lifelong Elvis fans. This wasn't made to chase a younger demographic or rack up box office numbers. If money were the goal, this thing wouldn't have stayed a theatrical release the way it did. There's a sincerity running underneath all the glitter and spectacle, an attempt to finally give Elvis his due after years of lazy, surface-level portrayals. And sure, for younger viewers who never lived through Elvis mania, it doubles as a gorgeous introduction. But let's be honest, you cannot fit a life as enormous as Elvis Presley's into 2 hours and 40 minutes. What you get instead is closer to a beautifully shot tribute, one last dazzling gift for the generation that lived through it, most of whom are now elderly or already gone, and for the rest of us, it's a colorful, heartfelt attempt to finally validate a kind of devotion that's been written off as nostalgia or hysteria for far too long. Luhrmann tells the story with real craft. Instead of marching through Elvis's life chronologically, he deliberately scrambles the timeline, letting the story unfold through the eyes of Colonel Tom Parker, played by Hanks, bouncing backward and forward through the decades. Almost the entire emotional weight of the film rests on Austin Butler's shoulders. Real archival footage of Elvis barely appears until the very end. And to its credit, the film doesn't shy away from the social and political backdrop of the era. It captures the racism baked into the American South at the time, and how that hostility echoed all the way up through local government and the Senate. When Elvis's father goes to prison, the family moves to a mostly black neighborhood in Memphis, and that's where a young Elvis, just 12 or 13, first falls in love with music through black artists and black culture. That formative experience shapes who he becomes, someone who never bought into the prejudice surrounding him. It's handled with a surprising amount of nuance for a film this flashy. There's one sequence in particular that I think is genuinely brilliant. It weaves together three things at once: young Elvis watching an electrically charged blues performance, a black congregation in a church caught somewhere between gospel and something older and more primal, and Elvis himself on stage years later, watching the crowd lose themselves the exact same way. It's one of those moments where you can feel the filmmaking reaching for something bigger than just biography. Then there's the relationship between Elvis and Colonel Parker, and Luhrmann frames it almost like a fairy tale, except the kind the brothers Grimm would write, not Disney. Parker discovers this raw generational talent, wraps himself around the young singer like a protector, and then slowly siphons off nearly every cent he makes. Later, to cover his own gambling debts, he locks Elvis into years of grinding Las Vegas residencies. He's less a mentor in this telling and more a wolf in a cardigan, a man who consumes the very thing he claims to be nurturing: And running parallel to that is a much sadder story. A young man trying to hold on to his sanity and his art in an industry that's chewing him up, in a world where even his own father gets pulled into the machine working against him. As for the performances, Austin Butler and Tom Hanks are simply outstanding. The role reportedly came close to going to Ansel Elgort, Miles Teller, or Harry Styles before landing on Butler, and it's hard to imagine anyone else doing what he does here. He doesn't lean on heavy prosthetics or an uncanny physical resemblance. Just the right hair, the right sideburns, and then everything else, the voice, the movement, the presence, comes from actual acting. Luhrmann has him sing all of young Elvis's material live, then switches over to Presley's own recordings for the later, more mature years. Whether he's talking or singing, Butler's magnetic, and his performance of Trouble might honestly be good enough to make Elvis himself a little jealous. As a longtime fan, I'd say Butler has earned every bit of praise he's gotten for this. Opposite him, Tom Hanks disappears almost entirely under the weight gain and prosthetics and gives us a Colonel Parker who's all warmth on the surface and rot underneath. That same friendly, reassuring smile he uses to charm a teenage Elvis is the exact same smile he uses later to deliver the ugliest kind of manipulation. It's a quietly chilling piece of work. They're backed by a strong supporting cast too. Helen Thompson as Elvis's mother Gladys, Richard Roxburgh as his father Vernon, Olivia DeJonge as Priscilla Presley, and Kelvin Harrison Jr. as B.B. King. There are moments late in the film where real Elvis footage finally appears, and I doubt anyone watching gets through those without feeling something. If you're old enough to remember him performing live, it probably hits even harder. Right before the credits roll, as the film catches us up on what happened to Parker and to Elvis, it mentions that Guinness World Records still lists him as the best-selling solo artist of all time, and that detail sticks with you. For roughly 3/4 of his career, this man was managed about as badly and carelessly as a major star can be managed, and he still ended up there, at the very top, 45 years after he was gone. Imagine what his career might have looked like with someone competent actually running things. He might have ended up the best-selling artist on Mars and Jupiter too. At the end of the day, this isn't built on a particularly dramatic or unconventional life story arc. What it's built on is craftsmanship. Beautifully staged, beautifully acted, expertly assembled from the editing to the sound design to the music itself. It's not quite a masterpiece, but Elvis is the kind of film you can sink into and enjoy, and despite its length, it never really drags. If you haven't seen it yet, I'd say it's worth your time.